Good evening and welcome to Money Matters TV. I'm Paul Sloat with Green Drake Partners, and tonight with me is Pat Weldy of Merrill Lynch. Good evening, Pat.
Paul, good to see you again.
Good to see you. And a little later, we'll have our guest, James Chan of Asia Marketing and Management. And now it's time for our guest tonight. Our guest is James Chan. Good evening, James. How are you?
Good evening. How are you?
I am good.
Welcome.
Welcome. So, you were recently in China. Why don't you give us your impression of what you see going on in China and how their economy is doing and the kind of changes you see going on in day to day?
Well, China has been changing ever since I first went there in 1982. And during my last trip, which was in late November and early December, I saw that the changes were continuing. It's more than just more high-rises and kind of more people with cars, and people were dressed more beautifully, and they were more kind of sprightly. I could also sense, because we were visiting a lot of companies, and I could see that the Chinese companies have been moving up on the food chain. They're doing things that are increasingly more sophisticated, technically.
Now, in 30 years, I mean, I got to imagine in 30 years, I mean, I got to believe in 3 years you would have seen a big change. Yes. But in 30 years, I mean, what was it like 30 years ago?
I mean, my first trip in the summer of 1982,
yeah.
I went to the cities of Beijing, Tianjin in northern China, Shanghai, Nanjing in eastern China, Wuhan in central China, and Guangzhou. And throughout those cities, there were very few kind of lights, sure. Electric lights,
right.
Very few modern hotels.
Any cars then? Was there any
very
cars?
few, very few. And there was this dusty, drab appearances, which have by and large disappeared in the big cities.
30 years ago, how did you get from place to place? Now I'm sure it's very easy, but back then, how difficult was it to get to those several places that you visited?
It was not that easy. We bought tickets to fly, and sometimes we just might be stuck at the airport right. for a day or two. It happened. Not easy.
It's not easy. I remember going to China back in the 80s, and the one thing that struck me was that the cities were wall-to-wall bikes on the roads, which I'm sure today is not the way it is.
Not the way it is. There are still a lot of bikes, but increasingly there are many more very good-looking cars, luxury cars.
Luxury cars.
Luxury cars.
So we have a China that's modernizing and
yes.
has changed dramatically. How does an American company selling 100% American-made goods succeed in China and deliver a good that the Chinese want to buy from a U.S. company?
It really is easier than people think. As long as a company makes a good quality product, a product that has maybe a secret formula, a proprietary type of algorithm, or maybe a particular type of new material, synthetic material, which is either high-tech or they have a management system that is very, very difficult to replicate, the company has a chance. That's what we've been doing for close to 30 years.
Now, the U.S. is I would say, more certainly of a service organization.
Yes.
Their service, economy. Can you do the same with services? Can an American service company, go to China and succeed in selling those services?
Didn't used to be. I would say 10 years, 15 years ago, it would be quite tough. It was still happening at that time, but increasingly, China is moving from being low-cost manufacturing to kind of higher value manufacturing to going into services. In fact, a good example is if you have been reading the New York Times over the past few months, you must have seen full-page color advertisements placed by the Chinese government trying to get Westerners to attend a Beijing conference in trade services, where they want the Western world to know we are trying to buy technology, we are trying to buy services, technical, scientific, engineering, professional, financial services. They've been placing ads. So I can see that there is a sea change kind of coming from the Chinese government, urging companies to go out to the West to buy technology and know-how that is intangible.
And is that partly because if we look at China over, let's say, the last 30 years, as the economy has changed and as people's living standards have risen, some of the low-tech areas where they used to compete in, they're not as competitive with countries like Philippines or Vietnam.
Right.
And some of the manufacturing has actually moved there. So now they're looking at what kind of value added can we do because we're not competitive anymore in those real low-value goods anymore.
Which is absolutely true. Of course, the Chinese try to hold on to those low-cost manufacturing by encouraging companies to move inland, from the coastal areas,
right.
Smaller
Right.
cities. Increasingly, that's of course what they want to do. But they're still losing some to Southeast Asia, as you mentioned, the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, India, to competing countries in Asia. But that's precisely why China is now trying to move into the service economy. And the moment they want to move into a service economy, they need now to get into the intangible, the so-called intellectual property aspects of the economy.
James, I know that you actually have made a DVD that you share with clients and potential clients.
Right.
Can you show our viewers that,
Yes,
that DVD and tell them a little bit about it?
It's about 45 minutes, 50 minutes talking about what it takes for U.S. companies to sell 100% American-made products and professional services into the Chinese market, which is what we have been doing for 3 decades. For a long time.
Yep.
It can be done.
And I also know that there must be challenges for an American company to try to sell goods and services or products and services. Can you isolate maybe a handful, maybe 1, 2, 3 of these challenges?
If I were the owner, the first serious challenge I have to be very alert to is if you make anything, if you provide a service that is of any value, someone is going to pirate it. Someone is going to make something that looks like it or provide
Imagine
a service.
that.
Like
Imagine
they will
that.
claim, I'm the best hedge fund manager too in China.
Right.
Someone is going to do that. So I think it's good to walk into the China market totally sober,
Right.
staying fully awake, and do not be paralyzed by the fact that
Now, are you trying to tell me I could get a pair of Uggs that aren't really Uggs in China?
Maybe even a pair of Nikes that aren't Nikes.
Well, the most ironical part is if you go to China long enough and if you become increasingly famous,
Yes.
you may have people who look just like Pat or just like Paul.
They pirate
Yes, oh yes.
So given this and
Yes.
having to be wide-eyed about walking into the Chinese market,
Yep.
how does a small or even a mid-sized firm compete and maintain their market position in a market where somebody's going to try to rip it off?
Yeah. On the surface, it seems difficult, but in fact, it's easier than what people think. See, small and mid-sized companies, the successful ones, tend to do something small, but they tend to do it extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
They don't compete with the Johnson & Johnson
Right.
or Coca-Cola.
Right.
They
Right.
compete by making, just like the client I went to China with a few weeks ago, they make highly specialized springs, a tiny piece of flat steel that doesn't look that mysterious.
Right.
But in order to make that particular little curl flat steel very well and be able to open the solar panels of a robot on Mars, that's tough. So if you are a small and mid-sized company, even including a one-person consultancy, if you have something which is a niche expertise,
Right.
something extremely small, but you do it so well that the whole world, including China, will beat a path to your door.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask him. You said small. I was even going to drill it down and get even smaller than that and say, how about one-man shops or one mom-and-pop shops or something? But if they have something rather unique and something that they do better than anyone else, you can show them a path to China.
Yes, even one person consultancy can consult with China.
Mm-hmm.
It's been done. This is nothing new.
Mm-hmm.
And I expect this to happen more often.
So what you're saying is China's not just for the Coca-Colas and J&Js, but it's for the mid-sized companies and even the single-person consultancy that wants to go there because there's an opportunity if they have something that's of true value to sell it there.
Something that is very difficult to replicate well. Mm-hmm. If you can sing well, if you can write well, if you can play tennis well, if you can come up with a particular raw material that fits into certain applications, they come to you. Mm-hmm. Something, it's either high-tech, high-touch, high-craft.
And my understanding correctly that they come to you, you listen and see what they have and visit their business, and then you determine, that does look rather unique and something that could be marketed, and then you actually take the next step and get them on their path to doing business in China?
Yeah, in fact, I work with one of the 55 or 56 what we call district export councils of the U.S. Department of Commerce. I often counsel area companies and help them decide whether or not their services or their products can work in China. But for other companies that really want to be determined to crack into the Chinese market, I will work with them to find agents and train their people in China and do whatever we need to do in order to get the product into the Chinese market. Oh, before I forget, you asked about the challenges. One challenge, in addition to piracy, is the importance of finding a good agent or representative on the ground in China. You can't just sit in front of your computer and send thousands of emails to China and be able to do business. You have to have somebody on the ground who can actually work with you, work for you. Mm-hmm. That is a challenge. It is a challenge because good people are not easy to find.
So you've collected over the years many good people all over China.
I watch, I observe, because it's not easy. There are many good people, but on the other hand, you have to find good people whom you really want to convey that helping you, working with you is a ticket to prosperity. Mm-hmm. If you cannot get that idea into their head, you just get another warm body.
How about what I was saying earlier, James? Is there any visible evidence that there is a developing middle class in China?
Absolutely. Oh, yes, it's happening. A friend of mine who works for a rather mid-sized pharmaceutical company has just told me that pharmaceutical company, instead of selling pharmaceutical, wants to sell their version of baby milk powder, and the sales are growing for one very obvious reason. The Chinese citizens are kind of tired of buying milk powder which has the wrong chemical. So they are willing, citizens are willing to shell out the extra $5 to buy something of quality. Not luxury products, but higher quality.
Higher quality.
Higher quality. They feel good that their babies are not getting sick. You know how crazy the Chinese are about their babies. They're willing to spend.
So before we run out of time, if you have any last bits of advice that you would give to people who want to do business in China, what would it be?
I hate to say the obvious, but it's just like what the two of you were talking earlier about investment, that some people really have to stay the course. People have to really understand. For any good things to happen, you can get money from the Chinese, but it takes quite a number of years for people to understand who you are, what you do, why are you so good in what you do. They really want to make sure that you are the real McCoy. And so if you have the tenacity, the perseverance, and you stay the course, you get money from the Chinese.
So in other words, it's all about building trust with the Chinese over time, that they can trust that you are what you say you are.
But only time can give you that trust.
That's right. All right.
Well said.
That's well said. Well, next week, our guest is Spencer Dean from the Alternative Board. The Alternative Board is a peer advisory board service and also offers business coaching to its companies. And from all of us here at Money Matters TV, your money matters.